There is a moment in some families that changes everything, not loudly, not publicly, but like a quiet crack spreading through glass. One truth, hidden for years, suddenly begins to surface. And when it does, the entire structure starts to shake. What happens when someone finally sees what others refuse to notice? What happens when silence is broken, not by the one who suffered, but by someone who simply couldn't ignore it anymore? You were never supposed to be understood. That's how these systems survive. They rely on confusion, on denial, on carefully maintained illusions. For a long time, your pain was minimized, redirected, or even blamed back on you. Maybe you were called too sensitive. Maybe you were told to stay quiet, to keep the peace. And over time, you learned something dangerous, that your truth was inconvenient. But truth has a strange way of surviving, even when buried. Somewhere along the line, a relative, someone who was not meant to look too closely, started connecting the dots. Maybe it was the way you reacted in certain situations. Maybe it was the tension in your voice, the pauses, the discomfort that didn't match the surface level explanations. Or maybe it was something even simpler. They just paid attention, and that changed everything. Because once one person sees clearly, the illusion begins to lose its power. Now the family feels it, the shift, the discomfort, the unspoken realization that something is no longer hidden the way it used to be. And instead of peace, there is tension. Instead of unity, there are cracks. Why? Because truth doesn't just expose what happened, it exposes everyone's role in it. Some will feel guilt, others will feel anger. Some will double down on denial, trying to protect the old narrative at all costs. And then there are those who will quietly step back, realizing that what they once ignored can no longer be unseen. But where does that leave you? For a long time, you carried something that was never meant to be carried alone. You adapted, you endured, you learned to survive in an environment that demanded your silence. And now, without you even speaking, the truth has begun to move on its own. It's unsettling, isn't it? Because part of you may feel relief, but another part may feel fear. What happens next? Will things finally change? Or will the system try to correct itself by pushing the truth back into the shadows? This is where many people misunderstand the situation. They think exposure immediately leads to justice, to healing, to resolution. But in reality, exposure is just the beginning. It's the moment the mask slips, not the moment everything is fixed. And in that moment, you may notice something else. You're no longer invisible. The same people who once dismissed you may now look at you differently. Not necessarily with understanding, but with awareness. And awareness creates pressure. Pressure to respond, pressure to choose, pressure to either face reality or run from it. So the question becomes, what do you do when the truth you carried alone is no longer yours to carry? Do you step forward? Do you stay silent? Do you protect your peace? Or do you engage with a system that is only now beginning to wake up? There is no simple answer. But one thing is certain. When truth begins to rise, it doesn't ask for permission. And once it starts moving, it changes everything it touches. There's a tension that follows exposure, a quiet but undeniable shift that settles into every conversation, every glance, every gathering. It's not always spoken, but it's felt. The energy changes. People become more careful with their words, more aware of their presence around you. And yet, beneath that surface, something deeper is unfolding. Because now, the family is no longer operating in complete denial. Some individuals begin to replay memories in their minds. Moments they once dismissed suddenly take on new meaning. Things that didn't make sense, before start to align in uncomfortable ways. And with that realization comes a difficult question. How did we not see this? But not everyone responds the same way. There are those who begin to feel a quiet sense of responsibility. They may not say it directly, but you can sense it in their behavior. They become more attentive, more considerate, sometimes even protective. It's as if they're trying to make up for something they can't fully put into words. And then there are others who react in the opposite direction. Instead of reflection, they resist. Instead of questioning the past, they defend it. Why? Because accepting the truth would require them to confront their own role, whether it was active or passive. It would mean acknowledging that they overlooked something serious or worse, that they chose comfort over truth, and that realization can be too heavy for some to carry. So what do? They minimize, they redirect. They attempt to reshape the narrative again, not as blatantly as before, but in more subtle ways. They might say things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "We all go through things," or even, "Why bring this up now?" Have you noticed that? How quickly some people try to move past something they never truly faced in the first place. This is where the real divide begins to form. Not between you and them, but within the family itself. Those who are willing to see, and those who are not. Those who are ready to sit with discomfort, and those who will do anything to avoid it. And in the middle of all this, there's you. For so long, your reality was questioned. Your experiences were filtered through other people's comfort levels. But now, something has shifted. You don't need to prove anything the way you once did. The truth has already started doing that on its own. Still, this moment can feel confusing. Because while part of you may feel validated, another part may feel exposed. You might wonder if people are talking about you behind closed doors. You might question their intentions. Are they genuinely trying to understand, or are they just reacting to the pressure of being seen? These questions don't always have clear answers, but what becomes clear is this: you are no longer in the same position you once were. The silence that once surrounded your experience has been disrupted. And with that disruption comes a kind of power, not loud, not aggressive, but steady. The power of no longer being dismissed. And yet, with that power comes a choice. Do you engage with those who are just now beginning to see? Do you open up, or do you maintain distance? Do you allow them into your reality, or do you protect the space you fought so hard to build? It's not about revenge. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about clarity, understanding who is genuinely willing to face the truth, and who is simply adjusting their behavior because they have no other option, because not everyone who acknowledges something truly understands it. And not everyone who understands it is ready to change. So, as the family begins to shift, as the roles start to realign, one question quietly remains at the center of it all. Who is really ready to face what has been uncovered? And who is only pretending? As the truth settles deeper into the family, something even more revealing begins to happen. It's no longer just about what was uncovered. It's about what people choose to do with it. Because awareness creates a crossroads. Some start to move differently around you, not out of obligation, but out of a growing understanding. Their tone softens. Their presence becomes less intrusive, more respectful. You may notice fewer dismissive comments, fewer attempts to override your reality. It's subtle, but it matters. It shows that something has shifted internally. But then, there are others who become increasingly uncomfortable. Not because they don't understand what happened, but because they do. And that understanding brings pressure they don't want. So, instead of leaning into it, they begin to create distance. Maybe they avoid deeper conversations. Maybe they act as if everything is normal, hoping time will blur what has already been made clear. Or maybe they try to redirect attention, bringing up unrelated issues just to dilute the focus. Have you noticed how silence can return, but in a different form? Before, it was a silence that erased you. Now it's a silence that exposes them, because now you can see who is choosing not to speak, even when they know. And that awareness changes your perspective completely. You begin to realize that this was never just about one moment or one situation. It was about patterns, about who consistently chose comfort over truth, about who had opportunities to notice, to question, to step in, and didn't. And once you see that clearly, something inside you starts to shift. You stop seeking validation from the same places that once denied you. You stop expecting understanding from those who have shown resistance to it. And most importantly, you begin to separate your healing from their reactions. This is a powerful turning point, because for a long time, your sense of clarity may have been tied to whether others believed you, supported you, or acknowledged what happened. But now, something is different. The truth has already surfaced. It's already moving through the system, and whether others fully accept it or not no longer defines its reality. So where does your focus go now? It turns inward. Not in isolation, but in alignment. You start asking different questions. Not, why didn't they see it? But, what do I need moving forward? Not, will they ever understand? But, who has already shown that they do? This shift is quiet, but it's transformative, because it frees you from a cycle that kept you waiting for recognition, waiting for fairness, waiting for closure from people who may never be able to give it in the way you deserve. And here's the deeper truth that many don't talk about. Exposure doesn't guarantee accountability. Just because something has been revealed doesn't mean everyone will rise to meet it with honesty or integrity. Some will, but others will remain exactly where they are, just with a new awareness they choose not to act on. And that can feel frustrating. But it also brings clarity, because now you're no longer guessing. You're no longer trying to interpret mixed signals or hidden meanings. People are showing you, through their actions, exactly where they stand. And that gives you something you didn't fully have before. Choice. The choice to step closer to those who respect your truth. The choice to step back from those who don't. The choice to redefine your boundaries without guilt, without over-explaining, without seeking approval. So while the family may still be adjusting, still processing, still navigating the tension of what's been uncovered, you are no longer in the same place. You're not standing in confusion anymore. You're standing in awareness. And awareness, once gained, doesn't disappear. It sharpens your vision. It strengthens your sense of self. And it prepares you for the final and most important question of all. Now that everything has been revealed, what kind of life do you choose to build from here? Now everything stands in the open, maybe not perfectly acknowledged, maybe not fully resolved, but no longer hidden in the same way it once was. And with that, a new reality begins to take shape. This is the part most people are not prepared for. Because when truth rises, it doesn't just expose the past, it demands something from the present. It asks for decisions, it asks for boundaries, it asks for a level of clarity that can no longer be avoided. And not everyone will meet that moment with courage. Some will stay where they've always been, holding on to familiar roles, familiar excuses, familiar ways of avoiding discomfort. They may hope that time will smooth things over, that eventually everything will go back to normal. But deep down, you already know there is no going back, because you are no longer the same. The version of you that tolerated confusion, that questioned your own reality, that carried everything in silence, that version has shifted. Not overnight, not perfectly, but undeniably. You see more now. You see the patterns, the dynamics, the unspoken agreements that kept things the way they were. And once you see those things clearly, you can't unsee them. You can't pretend anymore. You can't shrink yourself to fit back into spaces that required your silence to function. So, the real transformation begins here, not in forcing others to change, not in trying to control how the family responds, but in deciding how you respond. Will you continue engaging in the same dynamics, hoping for different outcomes? Or will you begin to move with intention, choosing where your energy goes, choosing what you accept, choosing what you no longer tolerate? This is where boundaries stop being an idea and become a reality. Boundaries are not loud declarations or dramatic confrontations. Often, they are quiet decisions. Choosing not to explain yourself repeatedly, choosing not to participate in conversations that invalidate your experience. Choosing distance where closeness once felt obligatory. And yes, that can feel uncomfortable. Because when you change your position, the entire system reacts. People may question you. They may misunderstand your intentions. Some may even try to pull you back into old roles, not out of malice, but out of familiarity. But this is where your clarity matters most. You're not creating distance to punish anyone. You're creating space to protect what has taken you so long to understand. And in that space, something powerful begins to grow. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding reality, but the kind that comes from no longer betraying yourself to maintain it. You start to feel a quiet steadiness within. A sense that you don't need everyone to agree with you in order to stand firm in what you know. A realization that your truth does not depend on constant validation. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to redefine what family means to you. Not just as a title or a connection by circumstance, but as a space where respect, understanding, and honesty can exist. You begin to recognize that closeness is not something owed. It's something built, something chosen, something maintained through mutual awareness. So as everything settles, as the reactions unfold, and the tension gradually reshapes itself, you find yourself standing in a different place. Not at the center of confusion, but at the edge of a new beginning. And the question that once felt heavy now feels empowering. Not, why did this happen to me? But, what do I do with what I now know? Because in the end, the truth didn't just shake the family. It revealed you to yourself. And from that place of awareness, you are no longer just reacting to what was. You are consciously choosing what comes next. And even after all of this, there is one layer that remains, the quiet aftermath that no one really talks about. Because once the truth has surfaced, once the reactions have unfolded, once you've created distance or clarity, there comes a silence again. But this time, it's different. It's no longer heavy with suppression. It's reflective. You begin to sit with everything, not just what happened, but what it meant. The years of confusion, the moments you doubted yourself, the times you felt alone even in a room full of people. And slowly, you start to piece together a deeper understanding, not just of them, but of yourself. Why you responded the way you did, why certain things affected you so deeply, why you learned to stay quiet or to observe or to endure. And instead of judging those parts of yourself, you begin to see them for what they really were. Adaptations. You did what you had to do with what you knew at the time. And that realization softens something inside you. Because healing isn't just about recognizing what others did, it's also about releasing the weight you placed on yourself for surviving it. Have you noticed that? How easy it is to carry responsibility for things that were never yours to carry. But now, with clarity, you can begin to let that go. Not all at once, not perfectly, but intentionally. And as you do, something else begins to happen. Your identity starts to shift. You are no longer defined by what was hidden, by what was denied, or by how others chose to respond. You are no longer just the person who endured. You become the person who understood, who saw clearly, who chose differently. And that choice is where your power truly lies. Because while you couldn't control what happened, you now have control over what you build moving forward. The relationships you invest in, the environments you allow yourself to stay in, the standards you set, not just for others, but for yourself. No more shrinking to be accepted. No more over-explaining to be understood. No more abandoning your own clarity to maintain someone else's comfort. This is where your life begins to feel different. Not because everything around you has changed, but because you have. You start to notice peace in places where there used to be tension. You start to value honesty over appearances, depth over surface, alignment over approval. And perhaps for the first time, you feel a sense of direction that isn't based on reaction, but on intention. And yes, there may still be moments of doubt, moments where old thoughts try to resurface, moments where you question whether you're being too distant, too firm, too different. But then you remember. You remember what it felt like to ignore what you knew. And you realize you can't go back to that, so you keep moving forward. Steady, aware, grounded in something real. And in that space, you come to understand a truth that changes everything. Closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes, it comes from the moment you stop waiting for them to give you what they were never able to give. And you give it to yourself instead, understanding, validation, permission to move on. So as the story settles, as the noise fades, as people return to their versions of normal, you continue evolving, not loudly, not for attention, but with a quiet certainty that no one can take from you. Because the truth didn't just expose the past. It gave you the clarity to build a future that is no longer shaped by it.